This morning. We've got apologies from our chairman today, so can I please firstly ask members to nominate a member of chair? Councillor Geddes.
I would move Councillor Smith to be appointed as chairman of the meeting.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, folks, welcome to the Welfare Reform Subcommittee of Thursday the 15th of May 2014. Can I remind you that this meeting will be recorded and that the recording will be subsequently available for public listening. We have apologies from, obviously, Councillor Collins. Do we have any other apologies? No? Okay. Can we move on to item number 2, declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations? No? Okay, can we move on to item number 3 then, Scottish Welfare Fund and Discretionary Housing Benefit Update. This is the regular report we have updating us on the Scottish Welfare Fund. Can I ask John if there's anything to add to the report? Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously the report primarily concentrates on the year-end position for both Scottish Welfare Fund and DHP, but just to give you an update on where we are in the current financial year, for Scottish Welfare Fund, in April, we were continuing with the high demands, and we've actually spent, we've spent 16% of the current year's allocation, but if you add in the carryover we've had from 13-14, that's about 8%, so we're on track with the average monthly spend. And for discretionary housing payments, because the awards are for fixed periods, we've had to review all previous awards and actually manually create new awards for the current year. And we've managed to do all the size criteria, except there's about 100 cases we're still working on to reapply the size criteria rules. And we've currently spent and committed 875,000 of the current year's allocation, which are primarily the size criteria and cap cases. And happy to take any further questions. Thanks.
Okay, thanks very much, Lorna. Can I open it up to members? Jane?
Sorry, Lorna, I'm slightly confused about the size criteria numbers, because I was actually going to ask about 3.8 indicates that there will be sufficient funds fully to cover demand and specifically those impacted by size criteria and other welfare reform related pressures. And I go on to page 7 of 12, and I don't really understand the no impact reason for award. And I don't also understand the 2,173 numbers to help with ongoing rental costs for any other reason. So I'd like to just ask about those. I've got a couple of other questions, Chairman, if you wouldn't mind, but if we could deal with just that.
Okay, thanks. Those breakdown figures were specifically criteria that was set down by DWP as a return we had to do. Now, they didn't, the no impact wasn't that there was no welfare reform impact. That was the DWP's phrasing of that. But there is obviously an impact because these people are affecting financial hardship, but it wasn't narrowed down to social sector size criteria as they were further on up in the removal of spare room subsidy. They had set criteria they wanted to identify, and anything below that was a DWP term of no impact, albeit, as I said, it's other welfare reform pressures that are obviously causing that demand area. Same with the purpose of DHP. Again, those criteria were actually DWP fields that we had to fill in and return. And the ongoing rental costs or any other reason pulled together a multiple of social sector and private sector rental cost implications. So it was more than just social sector size criteria, it's a private sector size criteria in there as well.
Do you want to come back in, Jane?
I think I'm still pretty mystified, to be honest. I can understand when you're talking about the two collections, but you mentioned actually figures, I think, Lorna, just in your introduction about the numbers, which don't tie up with what's going on here. Did you mention 800 figures, or I can't remember what you said, but you mentioned a particular figure.
Yes, what I'd said was this year we have committed £875,000 of DHP allocation, but I haven't actually got the number of size criteria cases. At the moment, our social sector size criteria, our last analysis at the end of April was 1,465 cases we know of our social sector size criteria. But obviously that will move as the year goes on, as people come on and off entitlement.
So in terms of the no impact cases and DWP's criteria, what sort of examples would they be? Would people, for example, that might be sanctioned and then come in for a fund? Or, I mean, oh no, this is actually discretionary house payment, so it won't be. So what sort of examples or types of cases would come under no impact?
Could be a variety of things in there. Could be people who have got medical conditions, may have debt issues that are not specifically related to the LHA restrictions or size criteria restrictions. It may be they've got a short-term fund issue, or if they have a moving property and they're needing some assistance with rent in advance. So it's that type of usually just financial hardship with no direct cause.
Sort of cases we had before welfare reform effectively for the discretionary payments, would that be the case? Types of cases?
Yes, prior to some of these welfare reform cases, yeah, that'd be the kind of case we'd be looking at.
Okay, members have any other questions? Jane, yeah.
Sorry, yes, please. And I've sort of warned Lorna about this one because 3.4, now, if you look at the totals, they don't add up. You know, successful number, successful refused, and obviously the differences must be the ones which are not yet dealt with. But it's quite a big chunk. I mean, it's 800 cases. And if I go over then to paragraph 3.10, I'm then being advised about the performance, you know, in terms of numbers of days taken to deal with these. But, you know, that's 800 out of that number of cases is quite a big chunk to then say that you're definitely dealing with them in that length of time. So I wonder if you could help me there.
I'll try. Obviously, the number of applications coming in, it's a report out of our document management system which records physical documents called DHP application coming in. There will be discrepancy between number coming in and decisions because there'll be ones that will carry forward into the next month. So there should always probably be a shortfall in the number of coming in, unless we're bang up to date and we're deciding that day. Some of the discrepancy as well is because of the way the report and trying to nail down some of the duplicate applications we get in. So if someone duplicates a form coming in, it may index twice into the system. So we have an anomaly where something is inappropriately counted as two applications when it actually physically is one application for a tenant. That's been an ongoing issue throughout the year. So it's not the full 800, but we're working at trying to narrow that down. Because at the end of March, there was about 200 or 300 applications that were still to be carried over, and most of them were actually applications for the incoming year, not retrospective applications.
Jane?
So you, I mean, without putting words into your mouth, you probably agree with me to say that we can't be absolutely sure about the performance measurements there, because, I mean, 800 applications, although I understand you're talking that maybe there are duplications in there, so there might not be as many as 800, it's still 20% of the total, so, and that's quite a chunk.
Yeah, I agree with that, but I would, I'm nearly fully confident about the days to process, because the way that's counted is out a different reporting system. So we physically count when we make a decision, and there's a backup to that, because it's not just a document management system we use for that information. We actually have our staff maintain a spreadsheet of when a form comes in, what decisions made, and when it's made. So there's that duplicate check on days to process. So of the actual applications that are true applications into that fund, and when we physically make a decision, that's where we take our days to process information off. So I'd be more inclined to say the number of applications, there may be a skew on what we're counting as applications and what's a true application rather than the days to process figure, because I'm more confident about the source of that information, it actually being a true reflection of how long it takes us to process.
Okay, there you go, Jane.
And do we use the number of applications for any sort of measurement of anything else? Do we? No.
No, our reporting back normally to DWP or Scottish Government is based on the appendix figures, which is usually number of people who have helped an actual true awards, because a person could have 2 or 3 applications into a scheme, but actually we may have different awards throughout the year, but that's actually one applicant. So those are the figures we report back at a national level.
Okay. Okay, for Ian's benefit, we're still on item number 3. Alistair?
So in other words, through you, Chair, my question to Lorna would be that you're fully confident of the validity of that information detailed in Table 4 of the report?
Yes.
Thank you.
Jane?
Chairman, I'd also, I think it's quite important we really get into this, because this was set up to make certain that we were tackling the impact of welfare reform. What do officers, what would we extrapolate from this sort of information? What's this telling us? Just in general terms, if one wants to look at this in a broader picture, what do you think this is telling us as a response to what we put in place?
I think when you look at it, maybe even in comparison to previous years, obviously the fund that we've got to work with is much higher, and the level of awards that we're making are much higher. We've been able to, as a requirement by DWP, is extrapolate where we're making those payments. So we are fully mitigating social sector size criteria. We are fully mitigating the impacts of benefit cap. And we do know that there is an increased demand on just general hardship cases that are out with, I would say that the highlighted welfare reform issues, albeit welfare reform issues in other ways, could be causing that general financial impact. So I think for me that's the overall information, our initial analysis we get out of it, that it shows where the extra money or how much more we're spending in DHP. I mean, given before welfare reform, our DHP pot was 78,000, so it's considerably more funds we're putting out in a discretionary nature than we previously have been.
Can I bring John in?
Thanks, Chair. Just to add to what Lorna said in terms of what use we make of this intelligence, I think it also feeds into the work of the Financial Inclusion Strategy Working Group. And we've got a piece of work there that's been led by Andy Reid, looking at both national and local statistics and data and trends to inform strategies going forward. So this would be part of that wider picture as well. So we'll be looking at things like Scottish Household Survey, indication of statistics coming out for areas of multiple deprivation. There's a raft of other statistics. This would add to that analysis, and I think over time indicate where we need to concentrate our efforts in terms of any wider work that we do through that strategic group as well. So there's the very specific operational demands that Lorna and her team deal with, and then there's the wider strategic context as well, and that's been captured through that work.
Would it be fair, I mean, obviously the amount of money paid out in comparison to previous years is significantly increased, and that's obviously because primarily, frankly, welfare reform, but obviously even just the allocation that falls under the no impact criteria is 125,000 compared to previous figures of about £78,000, you said. Is there anything we can take from that? Is that because our criteria is more generous in the past, or is it generally becoming absolutely clear that the level of hardship is increasing, and that's why we are paying out so much more to cases that obviously previously we only paid out 78,000 for?
I think there's a mixture of reasons in there. I mean, we have relaxed our criteria for DHP to where we were in previous years. Because the fund was so tight in previous years, we were very strict on, our criteria, and it very much was a financial assessment. Having relaxed that means that we can make more generous awards. But obviously the demand is higher. We are seeing more cases coming through where people are able to demonstrate financial hardship. And we can see that increasing with the changes to the benefit system. The sanctions side of it, we are not seeing that locally to any huge degree. I know there's a lot of national reports around about that, but The increased sanction regime only really started in Dumfries and Galloway in January and has been fully rolled out from March. So we're still waiting to see what kind of impact, if that's going to have locally.
Are we clear that the DWP are advising people if they are sanctioned that they can apply for support through the welfare fund? Because there was always a concern that maybe they weren't.
I think there was some initial misinformation with the DWP where they weren't telling people they couldn't, but they weren't telling people they could. So we have spoke to the local job centre manager to make him aware of what both the DHP and Scottish Welfare Funds are there for, and to ask them to make people aware of them and make them aware of what the criteria is. So I've not had anything back either from staff on the front line to say that that's not happening. So, I mean, again, I've no great evidence that it is happening either, but I haven't had anything back.
It's certainly clear the number of sanctions has massively increased. There's no question about that whatever's happening, the criteria may not have changed, but certainly the way in which DWP are enforcing the criteria has clearly changed quite dramatically in recent weeks and recent months. I mean, some of the cases are quite horrendous that I've seen in terms of the reasons why people have been sanctioned. So it's obviously important that those people are given whatever support. You know, if it isn't a legitimate case, it's a number of people who have the sanctions overturned that's the frustrating thing. You know, people are sanctioned with the criteria, then you could argue that's reasonable, but when that decision is then immediately overturned because DWP got it wrong, then people are suffering hardship during the period of time it takes to overturn that. So it's important that we provide what support we can. Can I, any other members? Ian, sorry.
Thanks, Chairman. Apologies for being late. So if I ask something that's already been asked, I apologise for that as well. Just some points to pick up on. When I go through at page 2, the table, it does show in October, November, December. I think that's clarified in paragraph 3.6 in regards to the appendix says this was inflated last year due to the change mid-year, the scheme which meant extensions to existing awards. Is that the case? If that is the case, a few things there, Lorna. At 3.9 on the next page, how is that structure bedding in now? How is it working? Is it coping with the pressure on that? At 3.12 on the same page, will the increase on workload, will there be an increase in workload because of the uptake potential? I suppose what Colin's touching on there will be giving a better support to people in this position. So will there be an increase in workload because of this as well, was one of the questions. What I did notice in the Appendix 1 was that, what do these 3 tables in Appendix 1, what does that say about Wigtonshire? Because it's clearly much higher in the Wigtonshire area compared to the other 3 areas. So what does that say about Wigtonshire? What is that actually pointing out? I've got my own thoughts on that. So but I'm just wondering what your thoughts are in regards to that. And on the next Appendix 2, in the first table there, it says removal of spare room subsidy. I take it, I just assumed because of what's been put in place, that's everybody who would be applicable to the spare room subsidy stroke bedroom tax.
I'll take them in order. The number of applications, they are inflated in Table 3.4 because that's counting physical applications into the process. So there will be duplicate applications for single claimants in there because I've had so many changes to the scheme. And I was explaining earlier as well, but some, because of our recording system as well, we may have applications that get counted twice when it's actually physically one application. So there is an inflation of actual physical number of applications. In the initial summary I did as well, we're looking at, for the current financial year, we have gone through all our size criteria cases and have made awards at the start of the year. So we've now committed 875,000 of DHP for the current year. I expect the workload for DHP to be less this year than it was last year because, again, we had to look at the scheme 3 times, start of the year and twice mid-year. You know, we had to revisit cases, so I'm anticipating at the start of the year we've got the fund, we've got it sorted, so these cases will be visited once they're awarded right through the financial year. So what we will have now is just for new applications or amended applications where there's a change of circumstances. So I expect the demand on the staff time for DHP to reduce in the forthcoming year because we have it in place early on. the analysis of the Scottish Welfare Fund and where it's split over the 4 areas, we have not at this point looked to see why some areas are spending, or our spend is higher in those areas. And others, obviously there will be cases that are multiple deprivation areas will have a higher demand. I'm hoping once we get our budgeting officers in place who will actually be able to visit people, we can go out and see and get more, or probably first-hand information about why there's a demand in certain areas, and use information from those officers to actually analyse, why is it the demand because those areas are multiple deprivation, or is there other contributory factors in specific areas that will cause that. So I'm hoping that information will become more evident as the year goes on and we get these officers into place. And finally, the number of removal spare room subsidy, yes, that was all the benefit, the social sector size criteria cases that have been reported there.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Jimmy. Lorna, sorry. I think in regards to, so we'll get information back in regards to Appendix 2, I would imagine, in due course. And you see at 3.9, so I'm absolutely clear. So we're saying what's put in place here, the structures that are put in place now are coping okay with the demand that's on them at the moment?
They're coping, it's full on. I mean, the staff are stretched and it's, a challenging role for them. But given, we should be, that we've got a lot of work at the start of the year because we've had to manually redo all the previous year's cases. So, that's, now on 1,500 cases have to be manually input. So once that dies down, I anticipate that they should be able to cope. But then we just have to see how the year goes. We don't know how demand will go. We don't know what people will face out there. So the team deal with both Scottish Welfare Fund and DHP. So DHP should die down, but we'll see how the demand for Scottish Welfare Fund goes as the year starts to roll out.
Thank you.
Can I ask, in terms of sort of benchmarking the information that we've got, what sort of national figures are published? I mean, we've obviously got number of applications, number of successful applications, so you'll have a percentage of how many successful. Does the Scottish Government or UK Government publish by local authority, what would be the Scottish Government in this case, I suppose, published by local authority area, any sort of comparative figures? Does it show that our percentage of successful applications are higher or lower than other areas? Because obviously we have that element of discretion, and just even in terms of things like the number of days it does to, number of days it takes us to obviously carry out an assessment, is there comparative figures published on that with other local authorities?
For DHP, no, not at Scottish level. I mean, bear in mind, DHP is still a national scheme, so we will report back to DWP on that. But again, they don't they'll ask for how much we've spent and where we've spent it, and the same information goes to Scottish Government. But they certainly don't publish, a Scottish comparison about. They'll publish how much funds each local authority has got, but they haven't published any sort of administration or processing figures.
Obviously, I mean, although it's a UK fund, it's obviously quite different the way in which we're allocating some funds here because of the additional Scottish Government top-up. I'm just interested to know what other local authorities are doing in terms of if they've got a more rigorous or less rigorous criteria at their discretion, if you like. Alistair? Sorry.
Thanks, Chair. Going back to the point that Ian raised, and particularly in relation to Appendix 1, can I ask, Chair, that this information, or can I have confirmation that this information, performance-type information, will go to the appropriate area committees on the basis of performance reports at the appropriate future time? And if that is the case, I would suggest that from a Wigtonshire perspective, it would be particularly helpful to have some indication of the breakdown in these numbers between Rins and Machars and perhaps Stranraer and the rest. That would be helpful on the back of Ian's comment. I had intended raising that anyway for the record, but as I say, it's even better that a member from out with the area that does flag it up, because there are there are statistics there which, on the face of it, would appear to be concerning. They're also intriguing to a certain extent. I'll say no more than that.
Is that possible?
We can obviously we can make it available to area committee and performance reports. We can do it at area level. Drilling it further down, we do these reports based on postcode area. The actual system that we have doesn't have, so we could split it by DG8, DG9, or just all the postcodes for the areas and make it available that way if that's assistance.
Absolutely, no, that would probably help. For the delightful boundary commission are not as good at cutting, keeping the postcode, so that postcode is probably the best we can get, and that actually gives you even a more deeper breakdown, so that would be helpful, I think. Any other members have any more questions? Can I just, in terms of the DHP, there's obviously, in terms of the bedroom tax, there's a group of people out there that are entitled to it, and we effectively, we contact people, RSLs contact people. There's also a small number of people who don't respond to that, and I think it would be helpful maybe through the communications team to issue something to encourage people to make sure that if we are contacting them, to take up effectively the offer, because I mean there may be very legitimate reasons why people don't take up the offer, which I won't go into detail, but there are obviously a number of people out there that are entitled to DHP as a result of the bedroom tax and our criteria, but are not taking it up, and I think it'd be helpful maybe through the communications team to issue something just to make sure people do basically receive what they're entitled to.
I mean, it's certainly possible to do that, but what I would say is we have written to, you know, we have tried. I think our last count, we reckon there's maybe about 30 cases out there that haven't, and the RSLs have written directly to these people, as have we written to these people, you know, in a variety of guises to try and encourage. But we can certainly try and do something else for those 30. But
I think, if anything else, it does send a clear message about the amount of work that's actually going to make people aware. I mean, there was obviously some misinformation in the media recently at a local level, whereby a councillor was obviously indicating that people weren't applying for it. The reality is you don't actually have to apply for this. We actually contact people direct. So I think getting that message across that RSLs and the council are working hard to make sure that people that are entitled to this are receiving it. And I think restating that message would be quite helpful to dispel any of the misinformation that's being put out there. Okay, can we turn to the recommendations? 2.1, are members happy to note 2.1 and note 2.2? Okay, thanks very much. Sorry, Ronnie.
We'll have to capture the request for this to be broken down by postcode. For the minute, yeah, you got that clear, thanks.
And obviously reported back in the performance reports to area committees. Okay, can we turn to item number 4, which is a report regarding options for allocating the remaining discretionary housing payment funds that we have for 2014-15. Could I ask John if there's anything he wants to add to the report?
Thanks, Chair. Nothing to add to the substance of the report before members, but some additional information relates to the additional £15 million that the Scottish Government are looking to allocate as further discretionary housing payments to local authorities, and there's been movement within the last week or so on that. You may recall that the Scottish Government have been lobbying the UK Government to pass the powers to raise the maximum cap for discretionary housing payment to the Scottish Government to allow to vary across all Scottish local authorities. An announcement was made last week that the UK Government have agreed to that request, and there is processes now in place to change legislation to allow Scottish Government to do that. And once they've passed the necessary legislation to allow them to raise the cap for DHP across all local authorities, that additional £15 million will be distributed. We don't know yet what the distribution formula is, but to advise members that the current position, we think, is that that £15 million will be targeted at local authorities who are currently up to their maximum DHP and have not been able to provide discretionary housing payments to known existing bedroom tax cases. And the target will be at those authorities who are basically saying they've reached the maximum and there are still households out there that they've not been able to help. We're not in that situation. So we're not anticipating a huge amount from this additional £15 million, but we'll see how that progresses. COSLA, the latest is that COSLA are taking a report to, I think, the COSLA leaders meeting at the end of this month, with a proposal that the leaders seek written assurances from the Scottish Government around timescales for the legislation, and for those authorities who are in a situation where they are up to their maximum DHP but wish to start committing DHP funds now, that they're legally allowed to do so. Again, we're not in that situation because the assessment process that we've set out and agreed at March's Welfare Reform Subcommittee still keeps us below our maximum level of £1.8 million. So that's the latest context. In terms of the substance of the report, that doesn't particularly influence anything within this report and the proposals set out. So happy to take any questions, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks very much. That's helpful, John. I mean, just making a comment on it, it's obviously the right thing to do, transferring powers and actually lifting that cap is the right thing to do, even if it won't necessarily boost income in Dumfries and Galloway. It will certainly support families across Scotland who are being impacted by the bedroom tax, even though we're actually already covering that impact in Dumfries and Galloway. Can I open it up to members? Ian?
Actually, I had a question, that was it. Did we have an update and just a bit of factual information in behind that, which you've outlined clearly. Just in regards to the legislation, is it Westminster legislation or Scottish Government? Because you refer to Scottish Government, and is a transfer, is there two levels of legislation here, or is it just the one? And in regards to the timelines, have we got any indication whatsoever? And I've got just a comment on after your answer, John, please.
My understanding is that the UK government at ministerial level have got the powers to transfer, to delegate that authority, and it's the Scottish Government that require the legislation to go through. The timescale for that, I think the announcement has been as soon as possible. It could well be after the summer recess before the legislation goes through. So there is going to be a time lag between formally having the powers in place to go through that process, but making sure local authorities who could be affected can plan for that change early on. Because what I don't think anyone wants is for that to be concertinaed towards the end of this financial year, trying to pull together anything that needs to happen. As I say, in Dumfries and Galloway's case, I don't think there'll be a significant operational impact for us, but it's something that's obviously of great concern through COSLA and with Scottish ministers. So the legislation's probably, I think, a few months away yet, but they need to start planning for those changes.
Ian?
Thanks, Chairman. And thanks for that, John. I thought that was probably the case in about the back of the summertime, which is ideal. Well, the only other thing I really picked up on regards to the report was is the agreeing the allocation in regards to the illegal money lending project officer. Fully support that, Chairman. I think it's a good idea. Illegal money lending unit, Scottish illegal money lending units, now part of Trading Standards Scotland, had never been to Dumfries and Galloway in the past, and picked up that there was a problem here. There clearly has been a problem, and I think this goes a long way towards addressing it. So I fully support what's contained within the recommendations.
I would agree entirely. I'm not entirely sure of the title though. It does look like the illegal money lending officer does look like we're up to something no good, as opposed to anti-illegal money lending officer. But I fully agree with the point you're making. Obviously, main point of this report today is we do have that additional funding on top of the money we've already used for DHP, and it's how we make sure we make best use of that. And obviously the proposal there is around the illegal money lending project officer. Alistair, do you want to come in on that point?
Yes, indeed. Thanks, Chair. Just on the back of that, I mean, I agree entirely for the record with what Ian has said, but, you know, we have payday lending institutions, you know, who take the view that they're not acting illegally, they're acting appropriately and all the rest of it. And I wonder in the circumstances if it might not be appropriate for this authority to make an approach to them and say, look, this is what we're doing, this is what we're having to do, this is going to cost us £30,000 per annum. Would you care to put at least a proportion of your money where your mouth is and help us fund these posts? You know, the downside, you know, as I say, it would be, the last thing I would want to see, Chair, would be the council being associated too closely with such commercial activities. But it seems to me that, excuse me, Chair, it would not be unreasonable of organisations who are continually protesting, you know, the legitimacy of what they're doing, to have it, put to them yet again that, well, okay, but there is a big sector out there where that is not happening. We're having to address that. Surely you could see it as being in the wider social interests, as it were, to assist us in defraying the expenditure involved. Merely offer it as a suggestion. Be interested as always to hear what colleagues have to say on it, sir. Excuse me.
Do any other member have a view on that? Ian?
I think what was going through my mind, I was going to bring it up depending on what members said, but it's similar. It's when you're sitting, say you're watching a TV programme and the adverts come on and you get these payday loans that come out and it's in about 2,500, 3,000, 4,000%. My jaw just drops. It's like looking at it in disbelief. I think it should be illegal. I mean, I really do. I honestly think it should be illegal. It should be outlawed. That. So if we can make it as strong as possible, I would certainly get in behind what Alistair's saying, and if we could put it into that context as well, I'd be a strong advocate to stop the level of percentages what they charge. I know they're talking small amounts, 100, 200, 300 pounds, but we're putting things in place to try and help people get out of poverty and that type of suppression, and you've got companies that are putting forward, again, it's illegal to lend at 2,000 and 3,000 and 4,000%. It shouldn't be legal, and if there's anything we can do towards getting rid of that whole concept, I'd be very much for it.
Couldn't agree with you more. Quite happy to share with you my party's policy on that particular area. Ian, if you want to have a look at that and support it. Alistair, do you want to come in on that point?
Well, as I say, I'm in something of the horns of a dilemma, Chair, because my basic instinct is to say, look, this is morally repugnant. We should have nothing whatsoever to do with it. Mm-hmm. They are there. They are functioning. We are having to, pick up, as it were, expenditure involved in that. And I would have thought that, that particular sector, should be given the opportunity, maybe better done on a national basis, I don't know, but should be given the opportunity, as it were, to say, well, right, okay, you're protesting, that you have nothing whatsoever to do with these people, the illegals, and to be fair, that's probably that no doubt will be the case. I'm not trying to stigmatise them on that basis, but we're tackling this, and it's costing us money to do so. Would you be interested in helping us to defray the cost of that activity? And that's basically the point I'm making. I wouldn't want to be too closely associated with them in saying that, Chair.
Absolutely. And one thing we certainly won't do is take out a loan from them to pay for this post, that's for sure. But can I bring John in at this point?
Thanks, Chair. Just to advise members of a number of things that we're currently dealing with through the financial inclusion strategy. There's a whole raft of actions related to affordable credit. So that's the flip side of what we're talking about. And that links to the work that we're doing around credit unions, but also links to the work that we're doing around financial education and training, going into schools, teaching kids how to try and budget, and also going out into the community and providing that kind of financial awareness. The illegal money lending officer, and we'll work on the name maybe, is to tackle the kind of doorstepping loan sharks, for want of a better word. And we had a presentation from the Scottish Illegal Money Lending Unit to the Financial Inclusion Strategy Group, and they've got examples where once they worked out what the interest was, it was nudging 18 to 20,000%. So compared even to the payday loans, which are licensed and legal, what we're talking about here are the doorstep loan sharks who lend 50 quid and then come back and ask for £200 a couple of weeks later. And it's that we're trying to tackle. But certainly we'll be happy to write to the trade body that governs the payday loan market to see what kind of response we get, if that's what members wish, and we'll report that back. But there is a raft of other things that we're doing in a more proactive way to try and promote affordable credit and affordable credit solutions for households in the region.
Okay, I'll bring Alistair.
Thanks very much, Chair. Let me make it abundantly clear. My own view, and I would hope it would be the view of everyone in this chamber, is that we've got to do whatever we need to do to root out legal money lending from our society, and that should be in a it's not only in a Dumfries and Galloway context, a much wider context than that. And I do, as I say, have a certain degree of apprehension, of the council, somehow or another becoming, involved, for want of a better term, with payday lenders, because I have my own very definite views on the appropriateness or otherwise of that. But as I say, I still think that, I'm particularly interested, Chair, in John saying, writing to the trade organisation and saying, well, look, maybe make it more general in a purely Dumfries and Galloway context. Are you not prepared then to put your hand in your pocket, or your members not prepared to put their hand in their pocket and to assist local authorities in meeting the cost of doing this and rooting this evil? And it is an evil, let's be honest about it, from our society.
Okay, Ronnie and then Jane.
I hear what Alistair's saying, but I'm not so sure it's the best way to go initially. It's a modest sum of money what we're trying to achieve here. If you go back, it all started with Northern Rock in 2007, and then we had the crisis, and the banks won't lend money, so people are borrowing money. So that's where the niche, and I won't mention names, but the wee puppets that come on the TV with and all the other ones, payday loans and that. That's why they've filled a gap, because the banks aren't doing it. And what I like about this scheme is that we're directing people to the credit unions. Now, it'll take a while for that to build up. We haven't, you read the presentation with a group from the credit union here. It takes a while for it to build up. So I would like to go, well, Ian's already moved the recommendations, and I would go with that. I would err on the side of caution on Alistair's point just now. I know what he's saying, and I can see what he's saying it for, but I think we get this up and rolling and then see what happens, and maybe we can address that question of somebody's putting some money in their pocket, at less interest, if you like. So I'm happy with the recommendations because of what we're trying to achieve here and get people to use credit unions rather than illegal lenders or even the expensive payday loan people.
Okay. Jane, do you want to come on?
Yes, I agree with people in the sense that, but what we want to stop is people actually ever going in to feel that they want to take out an illegal loan. And that's where I think we need to really focus our resources. I'd like to know, Chairman, when we're going to receive any sort of feedback on the impact that one officer is having on the credit unions. I'd like to know when that's going to come back to us. And yes, in terms of the name, I would actually seek your advice as to whether or not it would be against corporate equality policy if we were to call this person a great white loan shark hunter. But I think possibly that might not work.
Good suggestion. We'll remit it to officers to come up with the title, though, I suspect. But okay, can I let John in on that point, like credit union point?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. We did actually plan to have the Credit Union Development Officer do a presentation for today's subcommittee. Unfortunately, he's on annual leave. Well, not unfortunately for him, unfortunately for us. So we'll bring a presentation and an update to an early meeting of the subcommittee. But that was the intention. Work is progressing and it's going well, but obviously members need to be updated on the work that Donald and the team are doing. So we've certainly got that in hand. Thanks, Chair.
Do you want to come in, Ian?
It was only to say, I think we agreed at Community Customer Services for Trading Standards Scotland to come and give us a presentation. It could have been tied into that as well, but if it's already in hand, it may be fine, but just to bring that point up. Because legal lending money unit is contained within that organisation, and I know it's coming down to give us a presentation.
I mean, it also ties in, of course, with the decision we took at the last meeting to have effectively an event, seminar, call it what you like, conference, to look at the whole update on welfare reform, but also to look at the fact that we do have a commitment as a council and a list of priorities to develop an anti-poverty strategy, and how that would be influenced by various third sector organisations that would be invited along to that. So it may very well be something explored at that event as well. And just on that particular issue, I wonder in terms of 2.4, although we're talking about having bids under the Welfare Reform Mitigation Fund, and it does in the report refer to the financial inclusion strategy, and that effectively is our financial our policy at the moment in relation to anti-poverty. But I would quite like to see that maybe slightly tweaked to talk about the fund being available to support the development of the anti-poverty strategy, because I see that strategy widening out beyond the financial inclusion strategy as it's developed. Obviously, we're at the start of that process rather than at the finish of that process, but I think maybe tweaking that, because we do have a clear commitment as a council to develop that strategy, and it may be slightly wider than the financial inclusion strategy, notwithstanding that we're aware that this funding was given to us for a particular purpose. If members are quite happy to tweak that towards that. Yeah. Jane?
No particular difficulty with what you're suggesting. I think I'd like to understand the implications of it. I think we should receive a report back on the opportunity to do that, please.
Yeah. But I think we need to do that, absolutely. I think the issue at the moment is that we don't have that wider anti-poverty strategy at the moment. We have to develop that, and I think that's an important part of that event that we committed to going forward, basically. And the council, I think, have advertised one of the graduate placements, I think, to work on that particular strategy. But I think it's simply laying a marker down that this funding could potentially be used for something beyond our current financial inclusion strategy, depending on what the outcome of that anti-poverty strategy report actually is. We don't want to simply spend the money, if you like, on something, and then as we develop the anti-poverty strategy, discover actually there's something else that we'd quite like to focus on as a result of that piece of work. So nothing specific at the moment until we have that strategy, but I think it's laying down a marker that we do have a commitment as an authority to take that forward, and this is clearly a source of funding that could potentially support that work. Ronnie?
Can I totally agree with you, and it goes back to item 3 about the Wigton statistics. They seem high. The person or persons would look at that and could then tweak out an area that we might want to address. It might be areas of multiple deprivation. So the work's crucial for us to target our money, and so I totally agree with what you're saying, Chair.
Okay, any other members? Okay, can we turn to the recommendations? Okay, are members happy to note 2.1? To agree 2.2? To agree to fund title to be inserted project officer? To remit to fund the post, and obviously officers will look at that title if required. Was there anything else to add in there in relation to the point that Alistair was making? Obviously, I hear what Ronnie's saying about slightly nervous about approaching organisations. And do you want to hold that at the moment, or do you want to? Sorry, Alistair.
I think in reflection, Chair, with your leave, that it probably would be better, because I'm not entirely convinced myself. I think there's a certain danger in the council, however remotely, being identified or misidentified, I hasten to add, with payday lending institutions, and that's a possibility when you go and you ask them to help to defray at the cost of posts to root out an evil from our midst. There will always be people who either deliberately or for not the basis of not knowing any better will somehow or another, intermingle the two and get them bound up. So I'll leave it at the moment.
You've managed to talk yourself out of it, Alistair. Let's not use any brand names. Let's not use any brand names.
Chair, I have been religious in not mentioning any names either of football clubs or lending institutions. Come on.
Okay, we'll agree the recommendation then at 2.3 as it stands. Okay, and in relation to 2.4, are members happy to obviously, notwithstanding, we will have to require discussion, debate and reports back exactly as this anti-poverty strategy develops, but to bear that in mind when it does come to the Welfare Reform Mitigation Fund. Members happy with that, yeah? Okay. Okay, folks. I don't have any other business, so thank you very much for your attendance.